Thank you. Thank you all for being here, for Jane Dickson, who we've never actually met, and you told me we did meet 50 years ago, in 1980 or something?
82, maybe.
And where was that?
The first gallery that I showed with was Delahunty Gallery, which was very near here. It's now that foundation.
Yeah, Apex Foundation.
It's where Apex is. And Jerry was working at that gallery. And I was reminiscing about a sort of delirious evening that he doesn't fully remember, but
I was a chauffeur for the owner of the gallery, and
she was a wealthy Texas heiress. But she was closing the gallery because after 1 year she realized that it was harder to get in, to buy your way into the New York social hierarchy by having a gallery in New York. That wasn't enough, and she was like, ugh, can't be bothered. So I was supposed to have dinner with the director of the gallery to talk about my future and whether she could represent me privately. But when I got there to meet her for a drink, first we're sitting at this cafe on West Broadway, and Larry Gagosian dropped by and wanted to know what my husband's next project was. He was still a poster dealer at that point. And then he left, and then she goes, guess what? Jean-Michel is joining us. And I was like, oh, great. That means we're not going to talk about my career anymore. And then Jean-Michel arrived and said, we're going to Mr. Chow's. And Jerry drove us in this Texas woman's Mercedes up to Mr. Chow. I remember I picked up a menu, and Jean-Michel's like, I'm ordering. Don't look at the menu. We're all having Veuve Clicquot and whatever. And then we drove to the Bowery and dropped off all the leftovers at Warhol's. And then we drove to the Odeon for dessert, because Jean thought, oh, I got two cute girls, I'll make a good entry. And there was a certain amount of snorting in the back seat when we got there, on our way there. That was an evening to remember for me. Clearly it didn't impress you very much.
that is the most memorable evening I've ever had, and I didn't remember that I had it, because in another way I didn't have it, because I was in the front seat trying to make free money off of this rich woman, like all of you are trying to do out there. Your phony baloney jobs. I have mine now. And you say it, and I have a vague, distant memory. But it makes me actually want to change my first question and ask, in a way, what a New York that was right then. And I guess I'd like to ask you, because you're so associated with earlier New York as well as all the rest, what's the difference between that New York of our memories and this New York? And was it us, or is it that way for everybody all the time? What? Tell me about New York, not your life then, but what was it then? What might it be now?
This is a huge question that I do get asked a lot.
You what?
I do get asked this a lot. I started out with the goal of documenting my time and my place. So I was just like, I'm here now. Let's look around, and oh my God, this is happening and that's happening, and I did know, particularly living in Times Square, that it was already slated for demolition. That neighborhood was slated for, renovation for at least 15 years before it happened. Maybe it was 20. So I knew this view was going to change. And so I thought, let me draw it now. It still looked like Hopper's America because nothing had been built since the 40s on 8th Avenue because people knew it was going to get torn down. So they were waiting, the developers were waiting. But over time, now has become then, and the cheat sheet I brought out was that I looked at the names of shows I made, and I made a show a few years ago called All That's Solid Melts into Air, which was Marshall Berman, who's a philosopher's book. Because, things that seem solid just keep disappearing. Walking here, we were like, oh my God, that huge empty lot over in Chinatown that's going to be this huge jail that people have been fighting for years, and clearly it's going ahead anyway. Mm-hmm. And where they've torn down that block, you can now see the storefronts in Chinatown a block further east and sort of see what it all used to look like. But to the question of what was it like in the late 70s, early 80s, and why was that how is that different? Is it different than today? I feel like at the time that we all came to New York had been abandoned by people with money. There was this idea that everyone who counted was moving to the suburbs, and maybe if the powers that be ignored the city long enough, it would just dry up and blow away like a tumbleweed. And so you could do anything because the cops didn't care, nobody cared, and nobody was trying to invest. And what's changed, to me, it seems irrevocably, is that, when we would do things in abandoned buildings and in crummy lofts, young lawyers and stuff would come and they'd be like, oh, this is nice here. I wonder what this building would cost. And right away people went, oh, maybe we shouldn't have abandoned New York. It looks like there's little life left in this old pile of bricks. So everything that you could do back then has been monetized and corporatized so that you can't start a press, public. I mean, you can, but it's much harder. Or a gallery, or buy a building, or start a coffee shop or a bar. You can, but you're competing with, Live Nation.
Right. Which brings me, because I don't want to ever stick an artist with talking about just the past, because all time is the present in some ways, which makes me, you've talked about something called the American Sublime. And it's just such an interesting idea because there's the sublime, but you describe the American sublime. And I guess when we're seeing your work projected, what do you mean by it? And how are you occupying it? And what is it?
Well, there was an American transcendentalist landscape movement of people like George Inness, which I was very inspired by when I was young. But they were, inspired by American nature. And, as Joni Mitchell put it, we took paradise and put up a parking lot. So I'm like, okay, I got a lot of parking lots to look at here. We have these, we have destinations where we're like, yes, I'm in Central Park. Now let me look around and breathe deeply. But we have so many blind spots. And we're a very shallow-rooted culture. we're really a lot of transients. You know, there are not very many people in America who grew up in the same place that their grandparents grew up. We all are like, came from somewhere and we're moving and, you know, and then we're retiring in Florida or wherever. People are just like, yeah, it's, you know, it's interchangeable and the malls here look like the malls everywhere. And somehow that's been seen as a good.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying in all of my work to figure out like what, I was somewhat sarcastic when I wrote you about the American Sublime, but I am interested in
I
what's
did not know that.
American, because I grew up spending a fair amount of time in Europe. My mother lived in Paris, and my father was from Scotland, and my grandparents lived in England. And my grandparents would be like, "Oh, these are our American grandkids." But I was like, "Well, so what's different about us than you?" So I kept trying to think, what is American, and that's an ongoing process.
In a lot of ways, like you come from Chicago. I sort of see you as like Baudelaire's painter of modern life.
Amen.
Yeah, but also a night painter, as it were, where there is an aspect of the American sublime, insofar as like these are like, if you blur your eyes, they're like Rothko's Buddhist televisions that you're looking at something but nothing. You come out of the forbidden place of Hopper, forbidden insofar as it's strictly figurative, kind of quasi-narrative, and not uber modern, although he is a quintessential artist. There's a pointillism in your work. There's August Sander. Do you know who that is? The German photographer that wanted to take a picture of every profession in Germany between the wars. So you're also looking into the eyes and the world that will witness incredible tragedy. And being from Chicago, my memory of it is that modern art was not what it was in New York, that we were looking at outsiders, the Harry Who, the Chicago Images, the Bauhaus. Do you have any feeling or connection with that stuff?
I love the Harry Who, and I was I don't know that I knew about them when I lived in Chicago, because I left Chicago when I was 14, but I was very inspired by them a little later. Mm-hmm. But also, I remember spending a lot of time at the Art Institute of Chicago and absorbing Balthus and the Impressionists.
Yeah.
I remember dancing around the modern art abstract gallery. My grandmother, somebody took us, and I was with a friend of mine. We were 10 years old, and there was nobody in the gallery, and so we started doing cartwheels. We were like doing interpretive dancing around the abstract sculpture, which I love that memory.
By the way, speaking of memories, I think that the best show in New York right now, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth, even better than Siena at the Met, which is unbeatable and is the best show that will ever exist. You're in it, and it's the Cause collection. Yes, all of you are uncomfortable about Cause's work, but this show is so epic, and you just fit so perfectly in there. This is a show of outsiders, ne'er-do-wells, graffiti artists.
That's me.
That's you. What did you make of that show, and how do you think you fit in? Because I think you do. I'm
going to give a walking tour of that show. on December 12th, if you guys want to hear more of what I have to say, they asked me to give the walking tour. I know half the artists in that show. I told them I only knew half, and they went, "That's good enough." I love Brian. I think he's really fascinating
Brian
and
Donnelly
provocative.
is cause. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Brian is cause. And, it's hard to dislike people that like you, right? And he's been really supportive of me. And many people who I love and admire. And the thing that's brilliant about him is that it's all of his people that inspire him. It's like all his creative forebears as he sees it. And that's a wide range of people. There's a Hilma af Klint painting in that show.
He may be the only private person that owns a Hilma af Klint. It's a miracle. That's the first thing you see when you walk into the gallery.
The other thing that's extraordinary about him is that while he comes up through street art, which is, as everyone knows, 99% male, Brian has a huge percentage of his collection is women artists, because oddly enough, women are often overlooked. And so he's like, I think, I'm going to put my money on this one and this one. Like Judith
Linares.
Yes, her early work, I never saw that before.
Me neither.
And, what's her name? That her piece is right when you come in.
No, I don't know.
It's the erased Mickey Mouse.
Pensato?
Joyce Pensato, thank you. And he keeps posting, when is someone going to do a big retrospective of Joyce Pensato? I mean, go Brian, right? Because often she passed away about 5 years ago, and once you pass away, a lot of times people forget about you.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, guys, remember, she's really great.
And talking about women, I don't want to bog us down anywhere, but speaking of women, there was a kind of apartheid when you came into the art world. 51% of the population is female, and at MoMA in the year 2006, 3% of the work in the permanent collection was women. That's recent, dudes. So, and that has been changing, and I think that you're very much a part of that. Do you want to talk about feminism and art and, that and just the apartheid and the change?
It is changing, but there's still plenty of room for improvement. I would say I was the only woman that showed at the Fun Gallery, which was the legendary first street art graffiti gallery that showed Basquiat and Haring and bunch of notables. It's hard to even think. I mean, there's 51% of the world is women, but in art schools, in American art schools, there has always been way more than that. Of women, it's been 60% at least.
Right.
Because American art schools are private, so they needed the tuition of whoever would pay. So there's always been more women than men, and then when it came to actually showing and promoting, it'd be like, okay, girls, can you get some coffee while the guys get serious here? And, there is this hero worship of the big male, dude who's conquering. And women have to go about it a different way. And I would say in my case, part of the reason that I ended up painting a lot of the night is because the night is a danger zone for women. And that's no different today than it ever was.
You know, that's very true, and I've been thinking about this. When I've gone into my apartment and put the key in my lock, in my whole life, I've never had to look around. When I've gone onto a subway stop, it never occurs to me to just check for safety, let alone far, far more dangerous stuff. And I think that you've talked about fear and dread and those kinds of things, and that's in your work. Could you build on that just a little bit? Do I ask the worst questions ever? They're too big, my questions. I'm a curious soul. There's a lot of but fascination, curiosity, fear.
I guess part of what I've been sort of pushing boundaries my whole life and wanting to go where I didn't belong. And I think partly it was having an older brother and seeing the opportunities that he got as a boy and then what I was offered as girl. And I'd be like, I want to go to boys' summer camp where they canoe to Canada, not girls. They were like, oh yeah, you can go to camp. Here, you're going to go to a girls' camp. And then we played jacks all summer and waded in the lake only up to our knees. And I was like, I want to go, exploring Canada. Women's things just were not as great. And also, even as a little girl, there's always, probably every woman here can think of some time even as a little child, even with protective parents, where somebody is doing something creepy that you really... So I felt strongly from when I was little that there was this veneer of, and I grew up in the suburbs, so there was this veneer of, we have a nice green lawn and everything's cool, and there was a lot of other stuff going on underneath. Yeah. And so I think part of the reason I was attracted to Times Square was that it was explicit, Nobody was pretending that everything was cool there. Everything it was people letting it hang out. And that was a relief to me.
And who are the people in your work generally?
I would say they're mostly people that I don't know, but that I project. I feel like I'm looking around in the world trying to make sense of it for myself, and I'm not taking selfies of myself as I'm going around, but I'll see somebody scurrying ahead of me on a dark street and go, I know how that feels. So I'm looking I've dabbled and done a few portraits, but I'm really not a portraitist. I've held up Bruegel as a model of somebody who does lots of scenes and figures. And the figures, if you look at them, they're very similar. They're not portraits, but they're very particular of, this is the person who's drunk, and this is the farmer's wife who's about to whack the head off the chicken, and these are the little kids that are squatting in the, they're extremely identified as of the action, that the gesture that defines their personality and their class, which is why I quit doing nudes when I finished art school, because I thought I want people wearing their signifiers that say who they are in the world, not just a neutral body. I got nothing against life drawing of nudes, but just it wasn't useful to me.
That's so interesting because, in a way, I always feel like, oh, I know who that gypsy, or not gypsy, the fortune teller is. I know who's in that tattoo parlor. I know that driver.
That's my hope, and that's what I'm not interested in a type. I need to identify with them and hopefully give you the opportunity to say that you know that also.
Yeah. And then you mainly have drawn and painted. Do you do a lot of photography, by the way?
Almost everything I do is based on my photos.
I was just going to ask that. And then what is the actual process and medium of your work? I almost forgot to ask my number one question. So how does a painting come to being? Really? Aren't these art critic questions? They're completely from left field. Go on.
No, they're great. Artists make up, you cobble together your process over time. I'm sure you do with your writing also. And you start figuring out things that work for you. And I would say that I worked on the first digital light board in Times Square as an animator. I got that job from an ad in the newspaper in 1978. And I volunteered to work the night shift on weekends, ostensibly because then I would have my days free in my studio. It would only be my nights and weekends. In reality, I think partly I was like, I'm brave, I'm tough, I can do the weekend, the nights in Times Square, but also I was like, whoa. I know, and I'd work on the computer screen, and then I'd look out the window and go, oh my God. Yeah. So I started sketching out the window because that office at One Times Square was, I think, on the 3rd floor. And then at a certain point I thought and then we moved to 43rd Street, Charlie and I would draw some things out of the 6th floor window, but I needed more specificity. So I got a little Minox camera that was about the size of a pack of cigarettes, which was very avant-garde at that time. It was pretty expensive, but I just kept it with me all the time. And I was friends from art school with Nan Golden, and she always had these huge cameras, and I thought, I can't do that, and I don't really want to be a photographer, but I want to, especially out on the street at night, you can't be like, oh, you're mugging that person, can you hold that to So I just would carry this little black camera and go click, click, click. And of course, now I do it with my phone. Back in the day when you were using film, it was more precious. And so I would spend more time composing. And now I feel like sometimes I go click, 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 and I look at it and I'm like, I didn't stop long enough to compose it. So I'm basically, I almost never use anyone else's photo. It has to be, I was there, I saw that, there was something about it I wanted to catch. And even if my photo's not great, and I think I have one photo in this carousel somewhere, that I remember that time and place. So the photo operates more as a memento mori for me than as it's not, I'm never interested in being like a photorealist. And, if I didn't like that palm tree sticking out of the top of that Dodge, I would just get rid of it. I'm the interior decorator in my world, and so I don't like that bush, it's gone.
It begins as a photograph, and then you're wandering around, you're taking pictures, and how does it transform into a painting?
Well, I want to say, wandering around, I have certain subjects I'm interested in and that I'm looking for, and that often I go out to find. So I'm more like an actual photographer in that way. It's not, and as I'm doing that, I may see something randomly and catch it, but if once I decided I did a couple tunnels, I'm like, oh my God, I want to do tunnels, and I'm like, I'm going to go out and pursue it.
Right.
Or supermarkets, or whatever it is.
Types and
I examine
places.
subjects in depth, and there's some subjects like wig shops that have not come to fruition yet, and I have 30 years of wig shops, and someday I'm going to do a whole show of wig shops that you haven't seen yet.
So how does it get from the photo to the painting?
I do a lot of drawings, and I often will start, if I'm trying to figure out the composition, I like to use a ballpoint pen and a little bitty pad, and I just scribble it out. And I ended up liking the ballpoint pen because then it's clear to me that I'm not trying to make an artwork, I'm thinking.
Right.
Because it's just a scribble with ballpoint pen. Because, you can get seduced by your own glory of charcoal marks or something. So I'll do these little sketches. Then when I think I know what I'm going to do with it, I usually use this Canson Mitant paper. It's a company, and it's rag paper that comes in colors with a nice texture on the surface. And I'll sketch it out often with oil stick.
Right.
And often my drawings are as finished as a painting. They're just little studies. And then I tack them up on the wall, and I may do a whole series of drawings of the same, let's try it like that, let's move it over a little bit, maybe I'll skip that third guy, or maybe there was a woman in a different picture and I'm going to put her in there. And I just live with them around the studio, and then at a certain point one will grab me and go, come, let's do
let's
demo
sleep
derbies.
together.
Yes.
And make beautiful music.
Yes.
And I see you also as a kind of secret formalist, there's a lot of amazing stuff that goes on in Jane's work with the cropping. If you start looking at this, what she wants us to see, what she allows us to see, the geometric divisions, the central point perspective. How do you relate, or like so that's going on in your work?
I think a lot about formal issues.
Yeah.
And I think a lot about materiality and the appropriate surface that adds something to a certain subject. When I was young and in school, I thought, I'm just figurative now because I'm not mature yet, and I will evolve into the higher plane of abstraction. But in the end, I thought, no, that I want to use formal issues. I didn't want to discard content. I'm very interested in telling stories and in being part of the dialogue of my time, which is why I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Well, likewise. I'm not sure when we're going to go to Q&A, but I did want to ask you, I think that although 99% of all artists have had children, 99% of those artists were men, and they probably didn't take care. They weren't the primary caregiver. I know you've got 2 kids. What are they, boys, girls?
My son is right here.
Where's the son? Is there another one too?
My daughter is very pregnant, so she's like,
So a boy and a girl. And I think that artists' kids have the best lives on earth. What's your name?
I'm Joe, and that's true.
And if you could speak up, why is that true?
I think that my mother has given me an extremely unique perspective on the city and where I live. And I think that I was able to see the city in this completely unique way long before I started thinking about art.
What do you do now, if I may be so bold?
I started a music venue, and so yes, I'm very much in the art.
And did Dad do anything for you, or he's sitting there? No, okay.
He was a curator at the Clock Tower. He worked
Jesus.
with the Lana Heiss.
This is what I'm saying. Kids might ruin your life and make it hell. Although I'm not saying it did, but your lives are beautiful for it. And what was that? How was being a mother as a career? I mean, when you were in the art world, did you encounter, or what form did it take, the resistance to you as a mother, if any?
There was plenty. I worked with Brooke Alexander. I think I did 6 shows with him, or a lot of shows with him. And when I was pregnant with Joe, my first, he was not happy about that. Mm-hmm. And it was, in those days, he really tried to keep it out of sight and out of mind.
It wasn't mentioned a lot.
It was not mentioned. It was, I mean, in the 80s, they wouldn't open the gate for strollers in the subway. And the MTA said, well, we think if we let strollers in the subway, that you might let go of it and your kid would roll on. So it was like, mothers can't go on the subway. So that was the level. It wasn't just the art world. And there were no such thing as changing tables, because babies were not supposed to leave the home. You're supposed to be home with your baby. Many times I changed him standing up in a sink somewhere. Mm-hmm. But when I got pregnant the second time and I told Brooke, he went, this is a mistake, right?
Wow.
And I thought, if it was a mistake, I wouldn't be telling you about it. You wouldn't know. But that was the end of our relationship. He was like, 2 kids, you're out. Strike 2, you're out.
1 is okay.
1 was barely tolerable, but 2.
But now you're a mother, and
kids take time, And I know there's this theory of, well, you get a nanny. But I thought, this is somebody I'm in love with, who loves me, and I want to spend time with, I want to revel in that. I don't want to, you don't hire somebody to go out to dinner with your husband, and I'm too busy, I'm working. So I felt the same way about my kids. I wanted to spend time with them.
And how do you think?
Most of the time.
What did you get from them as an artist?
When I was pregnant the first time, I went to a psychic and said, will I be able to make art once I have kids? And she went, you're going to let go of all those adults that act like children, and you're going to focus on a real child. And I was like, never thought of that. Mm-hmm. And I got really efficient. I would get a babysitter for 3 hours a day, and the rest of the day when I was watching Sesame Street or whatever, I'd be thinking about what I was going to do in those 3 hours. And at the time, I was like, it's only 3 hours, and I really want to keep going. But I got really efficient, and that has continued to stand me in good stead.
And did your kids have an artistic practice when they were growing up? Did you?
Not
really. Were you
really.
drawing all the time?
Not really.
No. Okay. And what does your daughter do? Is this bad? I'm curious. What? Oh, okay. Well, I love the paintings, and let's open it up to Q&A, and we'll see what people have to say.
So these are my drawings there. They've disappeared, but I took a photo, it'll come back, of a wall of drawings in my studio, and you can see when it comes back around that there's repeats of a subject that I then went on to make paintings of. And I want to add one more thing about my process, which is that about 6 or 7 years ago, I thought, okay, let's look at what I've done so far. Let's take a look at the whole spread. and as I looked through, I went, well, I meant to do 2 more of this, because I've had a number of health challenges over the decades. So there'd be whole years when I was too sick to go out in the world. I mostly I tried to keep working, but often then when I'd be better, I'd be on to the next subject. So I kept thinking, oh, there should be more of this, there should be more of that. And when we moved 2 years ago and I had to pack up all my art and then unpack it, I found lots and lots of old drawings that meant to become paintings, and I had never done it. So now, in the eternal present, I'm painting paintings from photos I took a long time ago or from drawings I did a long time ago. I'll pull it out and go, I forgot this one, it's great. Let's just take it further. So I feel like I'm trying to fill in gaps in the arc of my practice.
Interesting. Yes, I saw you. Stand up, speak loudly, and...
Perfect. Hi, I'm Daniel. So you talk a lot about light as kind of illuminating this shared truth, shared experience, whether you're a woman or just like kind of a resident of New York. And so I was wondering if you would say, does the light, especially in the billboards, because I think of the billboards almost as these suns and these like celestial bodies, do you think that they give light to this manufactured or even like corporatized reality that we all live in, specifically in New York?
I did not hear the question, if you can repeat it, or did you? Not you, but did you hear it?
Yes, he's asking about light and about how the light in the billboards is illuminating the corporatized universe that we live in. And absolutely, and the fact that one of my first jobs was programming an animated light board. So I was doing ads for Seagram's and Coca-Cola, which I thought had nothing to do with my art. But it obviously instilled in me, when I would go home, I'd start painting things black like the sign was, and I became mesmerized by light coming out of darkness. And I'm trying, my signs aren't random, they're all thinking about things that we want, because what's being advertised to us is things that we want. So I'm not doing corporate logos like Nike, but that rooms for rent. We want rooms. We want to save time. And like the grocery store that's called Lucky, we want to be lucky. So I'm meditating on these keywords that, corporate researchers have decided is a trigger that will get people to buy. And I'm hoping that I'm making a sort of meditation thing a place where you can meditate on 99-cent dreams.
Wow. Great question. Amazing answer. I want to, Peter Drake, the great Peter Drake. What happened to your foot?
I cut my Achilles tendon. So, yeah,
God.
it's a little brutal.
All right.
So, Jane, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the surfaces, because they're disruptive in a way, and I wonder if they represent to some extent like the decay of the life that you were looking at.
I did come up in the punk era, and I came up in collaborative projects, which was a scrappy collective of artists, and we did shows in abandoned buildings and people's funky lofts, and so it was sort of part of the ethos that people were spurning art materials and using whatever. And I was already somewhat enamored of art materials, but I did embrace. I did some projects early on where I painted on black garbage bags. And even from the beginning, I was trying to pair the material, think of materials that would enhance a certain subject. So I did some early portraits of my friends, fellow artists that I thought of, oh, I'll make them on garbage bags because we're sort of throwaway punks. And then I do a lot with oil stick on rough linen, but like these bridges and highways are on Astroturf. And that came about because the first ones are of highways, and it's an hourglass shape where sky, highway, and then there's these triangles that come in of greenery blur because it's the view down the highway. And the first one I did on canvas, and I went like this for the trees, and a friend came over and said, looks like you don't care about those trees. And I thought, I don't. I mean, I love trees, but in this, when you're moving on the highway, you're just seeing a blur. You're not seeing each leaf. And then I went to Home Depot after that studio visit, and I saw this roll coming down from the ceiling, and I went, I'm going to paint. If I buy this roll of green Astroturf, and then the blur of the greenery is, Astroturf is a symbol of nature. No one is fooled. I'm not pretending so it gives a whole layer of the idea of, the highway chopping into nature, and we experience nature as this blur. I've also painted on, the strippers are on sandpaper. So it's sort of with oil stick on sandpaper, so it's creamy against abrasive, look but don't touch, proceed at your own risk. So that they're small, they're on the size of a piece of sandpaper.
Illuminated manuscripts.
I made them bigger, but also I made bigger paintings, but there was something wonderful about the small scale for the strippers, so they could be your sort of private thing. And I'm now working on a series on felt of gaming tables, and I did a whole series of houses. I think there's one in there on carpet samples. When we had to leave Times Square because they tore our building down, I was like, I need to make a home for my small children. And this is artist logic. I thought, let me go take a lot of photos of homes and paint them, and then I'll figure out what home should look like. I don't think it helped them particularly, but I think one of his first phrases, we would be in the car and we would always go, that's a nice house. And he would go, that's a nice house.
I could live there. I could live there.
Or what would it be like to live there? Yeah.
How many hours a day regularly or whatever do you work?
I'm not very methodical. I have found in the last couple of years, since I'm not teaching and I can paint as much as I want, that I completely messed up my shoulder by overpainting. So now I'm like, do not paint more than 3 or 4 hours a day, and I'm sure if you're young, this isn't a problem, but now my joints go, But there's a lot of art that's not painting. So painting 3 hours a day maybe is fine. And then there's answering emails and doing all the other parts of life as an artist.
Questions? Anybody?
We've beaten them down.
Um,
Here's one.
I have one more question too, so go on.
I'm really interested in how you think about place, like Times Square in a bigger way, but a lot of these paintings are more specific places, and how you approach that subject.
I did do a lot of paintings of LA because I really wanted to. I don't think there's too many there. Like the demo derbies, you're seeing one right now. This one is owned by Chase Bank, and they have it in their corporate
Wow.
boardroom. It was bought by a European American bank, and when Chase bought European American, and they had it in their boardroom, and then when Chase bought European American Bank, they moved this painting. I did that series because my early work, everyone only described it as about sex, and I thought, if I do cars, people won't say it's about sex, but they reviewed it as that it was all about sex anyway. But I liked that it was ended up in this corporate boardroom because I was like, okay, we're a dog-eat-dog culture, you know, the last one moving wins, and God knows in this election, we're really there. And I thought, this is really the apotheosis of American entertainment. Go smash up some cars.
Do you like to drive, by the way? Because there's a lot of road pictures here.
Don't you? I mean, growing up in...
I love driving. I have to drive once each day.
Well, this is our heritage from Chicago. I couldn't wait. We were all counting till the day we turned 16, and you went and got your license that day. And it stuns me that my son doesn't have a driver's license. He's a New Yorker, I know. Where did I go wrong? At least he learned to swim. Those were my two criteria: learn to drive and learn to swim.
Charlie, is there anything you would like to ask Jane?
I was thinking of how you might identify or a mentor or another artist. It could be a younger artist, or it could be a more classic, well-known artist that you identify with and that you see as a like spirit in the world. Another artist, hopefully a younger artist.
I love that question. Jane? No.
I don't know if I have an answer for this question. I love so many artists and feel like like you mentioned Rothko, and I went, yes, I love Rothko. So I feel like I'm a magpie. I get inspiration all over the place. And I know you asked me this on the train, and I was like,
We just want to get away from the hopper thing.
Oh, and I said hopper.
You did.
That's why you got irked.
And I want to see to build some new lanes.
Well, I said Rothko, too.
yeah. And I'm a contrarian, so I'm okay with being down with Hopper. I think he's a pretty good painter.
We're fighting now. And she hasn't answered your question, but...
I may not.
Okay. She did say Bruegel. I was turned on by the Bruegel thing.
And Watteau is another big hero.
Rothko?
Watteau.
Watteau is epic. You should, anyway. My last question is this. There's a lot of, raise your hand if you're a godforsaken artist, please. Look around, you poor bastards. Okay. What do you want them to take away? What do you want them to know about being an artist, a life lived in art?
Artists are people that can't help it. Anyone who can figure out something else to do, as you have, will do it because it's a really hard life, even when it looks like it's going great. It's a really hard life. It's 100% self-motivated. Nobody's like, where's your next, did you do your homework? No, it's like you do it or you don't do it. Nobody else really cares. So if you can't help it, God bless you and go for it. And it's so idiosyncratic. There is no one way to do it.
For every artist, there is a style. You just have to find yours, or all 1,000 of yours, whatever it is. seems to be what you're alluding to there. There are as many centers in the art world as there are artists, you big dopes. And this is an example of an artist who did that, who found her own voice and pursues it.
I guess I would just add to that my other motto is, I mean, people make art because they have to for their own pleasure. You know, it's a compulsive activity. It's, I feel like, on the spectrum from headbanging. And some people make things that are useful to, you know, everyone makes art to make themselves happy. Some people make art that also reaches out to the rest of the world and makes other people happy. And that is a whole other job. Making the art, we all know, is hard, but once you've done it, that's only half of it. And figuring out ways to get it out to the world is the other half. And sometimes the world doesn't need what you're offering. And there's trends all the time, so they might not need it now, but maybe 3 years from now, they'll be like, oh my God, it's just what we're looking for. So you need all kinds of strategies so that you don't have a nervous breakdown in the times when nobody wants it. And then the other thing is, my motto has always been, if I'm not, you know, if you're not invited to the party, throw your own. So, you know, finding ways to meet people that are like-minded, and especially to meet people that aren't like-minded. I think one thing that many artists fall into out of art school is they go, okay, I have my 5 friends, and we shared a studio, and we all agree with each other, and we love each other, and we're gonna pat each other in the back, and everybody else is shit, and I'm not gonna listen to them. And then you don't get out into the world. So it's sometimes hard and painful and weird to be talking to people that are making things that are totally diametrically opposed to yours, but dialoguing with them can make your work stronger.
Thank you, Jane Dickson.
Thank you for coming.